The war had been over for 6 years, but nobody had bothered to clean up after it. That was the job now. Daniel Reyes flew his old freighter through a graveyard of broken ships, past hulls torn open like tin cans, past frozen bodies that no one had come to collect. He was not a soldier. He was a salvager. He got paid to go where others did not want to go and pull out anything worth selling. The system was called Draconis Minor, though almost nobody used that name anymore. Most people just called it the boneyard. It used to belong to a species called the Draconi, a race of tall, scaled people who had ruled this part of space for over 1,000 years. Then the Corveth Dominion came, and in a war that lasted less than 2 years, the Draconi were gone. Not defeated. Gone. Every world, every fleet, every living Draconi wiped from existence. Daniel had heard the stories, but flying through the wreckage of their capital system, he finally understood what those stories meant. He was not alone on this trip. A coalition of alien governments had hired a small fleet of independent salvagers to clear the debris field before it drifted into shipping lanes. Daniel's crew was just 2 others, a quiet engineer named Robert Klein and a Velisar scholar named Torin, a thin, blue-skinned alien who talked more than anyone Daniel had ever met. Torin was there to catalog anything of historical value before it was melted down for scrap. "You know," Torin said over the comm as Daniel guided the ship past a collapsed space station, "the Draconi built things to last forever. It is strange that none of it did." Daniel did not answer. He was too busy watching his scanners. Something below the wreckage had caught his attention, a shape buried deep beneath a collapsed tower, still giving off a faint power signal after 6 years of silence. That should not have been possible. Everything down there should have been dead a long time ago. "Torin, are you seeing this?" Daniel asked. There was a pause. "I am seeing it. I do not understand it." They brought the ship down carefully, landing near the collapsed structure. It had once been some kind of temple or vault, built from black stone that still gleamed despite the dust and ruin around it. Daniel suited up and went in alone, against Robert's advice, because that was the kind of thing Daniel did. He liked being the first person to see something nobody else had seen in a long time. The inside of the vault was untouched. While the surface world above had been burned to ash, this chamber had survived, sealed away and protected by walls thick enough to shrug off orbital bombardment. In the center of the room sat a stone cradle, and inside that cradle was an egg. It was enormous, easily the size of a large boulder, its surface covered in thick, cracked scales that shimmered faintly even in the dim light of Daniel's helmet lamp. His scanner showed no life signs. According to every reading, whatever was inside that shell should have died along with everything else in this system years ago. Daniel reached out and touched it anyway. The moment his glove made contact, the shell pulsed with warmth, a heat that had no business existing after 6 years in a dead system. He pulled his hand back, startled, then reached out again, this time pressing his bare palm against the surface after removing his glove. He felt it then, not just heat but something else. A presence. Faint, but there, like a heartbeat buried deep beneath the shell. "Torin, get down here," Daniel said. "Now." When Torin arrived and saw the egg, the alien went very still, which for Torin was unusual. "This should not be possible," Torin said quietly. "This is a Draconi egg, a dragon egg. They were the greatest weapons the Empire ever had, war beasts bonded to riders from birth. But the Draconi are extinct, Daniel. There should be no eggs left, not viable ones, not after this long." "Well, this one's warm," Daniel said, "and it's not stopping." Torin explained what little was known about Draconi eggs while Daniel ran a scanner over the shell again and again, unable to quite believe what he was seeing. Dragon eggs, Torin said, could remain dormant for centuries if properly sealed, waiting for the right conditions to hatch. But the old stories also said something else, something that made Torin's voice drop lower. Whoever touched the shell first, right at the moment of hatching, would become the dragon's keeper for life. A bond neither side could choose to break. "You should not have touched it," Torin said. "Bit late for that." Daniel replied, and he was already lifting the cradle into a containment unit, ignoring the way Robert shouted at him over the comm to leave the thing where it was. Daniel had salvaged 1,000 pieces of junk in his career, but this was not junk. This was the last piece of an entire civilization, and something in him refused to leave it behind to rot. By the time the ship broke orbit and turned toward home, the egg sat secured in the cargo hold, its surface glowing faintly under the containment field. Robert kept glancing at it through the monitors, uneasy. Torrin sat nearby, still and thoughtful, running old texts through a translator, trying to understand what they had just found. None of them noticed, at first, the thin crack beginning to spread across the shell. 3 days into the journey home, the ship's alarms went off in the middle of the night cycle. Daniel woke up to red lights flashing across his cabin wall, and Robert's voice shouting through the comm that the cargo hold containment field was failing. Daniel was out of bed and running before he even finished processing what that meant. He reached the cargo hold to find the egg shaking violently inside its containment unit, rocking back and forth so hard that the metal frame around it groaned under the strain. Cracks had spread across the shell in every direction now, glowing faintly from within, like something bright was trying to claw its way out from the inside. "Daniel, get back," Robert's voice crackled through the intercom. "We don't know what that thing is going to do when it hatches." Daniel did not get back. He stepped closer instead, ignoring every instinct telling him this was a bad idea, and placed both hands flat against the trembling shell. The moment he touched it, the shaking seemed to calm just slightly, as if something inside recognized the contact. Then the shell split open. It happened fast. A burst of pale light, a crack that ran the length of the egg, and then the shell fell away in pieces to reveal something curled up inside, wet and small and gasping for its first breath of air. It was a dragon. There was no other word for it. Small compared to the egg it came from, but unmistakably draconic, with silver scales that caught the light like polished metal, and a pair of ember-colored eyes that opened for the first time and immediately found Daniel's face. Nobody moved. The hatchling did not either at first, just stared up at him, still curled where it had fallen, chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. Then slowly, it unfurled itself and crawled forward until it was pressed against Daniel's leg, making a low sound in its throat that was somewhere between a growl and a purr. "Oh no," Torrin said from the doorway, voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, this is exactly what the old records warned about." "What's happening?" Daniel asked, not daring to move. "It has imprinted on you," Torrin said. "The bond has already formed. There is no undoing it now." Daniel looked down at the small creature curled against his leg and felt something shift in his chest, a strange warmth that was not quite his own feeling, like it was being shared with him from somewhere else. He realized with growing unease that he could feel the hatchling's emotions bleeding faintly into his own mind. Fear, hunger, and underneath all of it, something like relief. "It's scared," Daniel said quietly. "Of course it is scared," Torrin replied. "It was alone in that shell for who knows how long, and now it has woken up in a universe where its entire species is gone. You are all it has, Daniel, whether either of you wanted that or not." Robert arrived a moment later, keeping a cautious distance, staring at the hatchling with wide eyes. "That thing is going to grow, isn't it?" he said. It was not really a question. Torrin nodded grimly. Draconi dragons were never small. In the old records, fully grown bonded dragons were large enough to carry entire squads of riders into battle, and their elemental abilities alone were enough to level cities. This is the last one in the galaxy. It is going to grow fast, and it is going to grow big. Daniel crouched down slowly and reached out a hand. The hatchling sniffed at his fingers, then pressed its small head into his palm, letting out another low sound, softer this time. Whatever fear and worry the adults around him were feeling, the creature itself seemed to only care about one thing, staying close to the person it now considered its own. "I'm calling him Rook," Daniel said, without really planning to say it out loud. "You should not be nomming it," Robert said. "You should be figuring out what to do with it before someone finds out we have it." But it was already too late for that too. Word of an unregistered Draconi artifact recovered from the boneyard had already gone out through the salvage network days ago, back when Daniel first reported the find to the Coalition office. By the time their ship reached the nearest neutral trade station 3 days later, the story had grown legs of its own, twisted and exaggerated with every retelling. A human had found a dragon egg. A human had bonded with the last dragon in the galaxy. Some species on the station stared at Daniel with open curiosity as he walked Rook, now the size of a large dog and growing fast, through the public corridors on a leash Robert had rigged from spare cable. Others kept their distance, whispering behind closed doors. And somewhere out among the stars, word was already reaching ears that should never have heard it at all, ears belonging to a government that had spent a great deal of effort making very sure no Draconi, egg or otherwise, had survived their war. Daniel did not know it yet, but the calm was already over. Rook pressed close against his leg as they walked, sensing the tension in the air before Daniel himself did, and somewhere deep in their new and unwanted bond, the little dragon's fear began to sharpen into something closer to alertness. Sleep did not come easy anymore. Every night, Daniel closed his eyes and found himself somewhere else entirely, standing on scorched fields under a sky full of smoke, watching riders on dragonback fall from the air one after another. He would wake up gasping, heart pounding, and find Rook already awake beside him, watching him with those ember-colored eyes, as if the dragon had felt the dream too. "You're getting his memories," Torrin said one morning, examining the readings from a small device strapped to Daniel's wrist that tracked his vital signs during the episodes. Or fragments of them. Draconi eggs were said to carry inherited memory from the parent, passed down through the bond once it forms. It seems your connection with Rook is strong enough to be pulling some of it through. "Lucky me," Daniel muttered, rubbing his eyes. He had not had a full night's sleep in almost 2 weeks. Rook, for his part, was no longer the small creature that had crawled out of that shell. In the weeks since hatching, he had grown at a rate that defied every scientific model the Coalition scientists tried to build around him. What should have taken years took days instead. He was now the size of a small shuttle, silver scales darkening slightly toward the edges, wings still too small for his growing body but strengthening every day. The scientists studying him were baffled. No non-Draconi had ever been recorded successfully bonding with a dragon egg before. Most assumed it was not biologically possible at all. And yet here Rook was, thriving, bonded to a human who had no idea what he was doing. "The bond is not supposed to work this way," one of the Coalition researchers told Daniel during a checkup, a nervous-looking creature from a species Daniel still could not pronounce the name of correctly. "Draconi biology should reject an outside species entirely. There should be no compatible link. But the readings show a full neural bond, stronger than anything recorded in the old Draconi archives." "So what does that mean?" Daniel asked. "It means either the old records were wrong," the researcher said, "or your species is not what anyone assumed it was." That thought stuck with Daniel more than he wanted to admit. He had grown up thinking of humanity as the newest, smallest player in a galaxy full of much older, much more advanced species. Humans had barely made it off their homeworld a few generations ago, and yet here he was, bonded to a creature that should not have been able to bond with him at all, carrying memories of a species that had died out before humanity had even reached the stars. Through the dreams, and through the flashes that came to him even while awake, Daniel began piecing together fragments of what had happened to the Draconi. He saw riders fighting alongside their dragons in the sky, saw entire fleets burning, saw a final stand over what must have been the Draconi capital, dragons and riders fighting together even as their world fell apart beneath them. He saw a choice being made in those final days, not to run, not to hide their remaining eggs and hope to rebuild elsewhere, but to stay and fight to the very end rather than let the enemy capture a single living dragon. It should have driven the Draconi to extinction cleanly. And yet one egg had survived, hidden in that sealed vault, waiting for exactly this. Word of Daniel's bond with Rook had not stayed contained to the trade station for long. Political channels across the coalition were buzzing with the news, some governments sending formal requests to study Rook, others sending less formal requests to have him handed over entirely. And then there was the Corvath Dominion, the empire responsible for wiping the Draconi from existence in the first place. The message came through official coalition channels 3 weeks after Rook's hatching, blunt and to the point. The Corvath Dominion demanded that the surviving Draconi specimen be surrendered to their custody for what they called proper containment, citing old wartime treaties that gave them jurisdiction over any remaining Draconi assets. If the specimen was not surrendered, the message continued, the Dominion reserved the right to take appropriate action. Daniel read the message twice, sitting in the small cargo bay that had become something like Rook's den, the young dragon curled up nearby, watching him with quiet, careful attention. He could feel a faint unease through their bond, as if Rook understood on some level exactly what that message meant. "They're not getting him," Daniel said out loud, mostly to himself. Torrin, standing in the doorway, did not look surprised. The coalition will not force the issue, not directly, but the Dominion is not known for patience, and they are not known for asking twice. "Then they can come ask a third time," Daniel said, "because the answer isn't changing." It was a bold thing to say for a man with no military training, no fleet, and no weapons beyond a young dragon still learning how to use his own claws. But something had settled in Daniel over the past 3 weeks, some stubborn certainty that had grown alongside the bond itself. He had not asked for this. He had not planned any of it. But Rook was his now, in every way that mattered, and Daniel Reyes was not the kind of man who walked away from the things that mattered to him. Outside, unseen and unheard, the first Corvath scouts had already begun quietly tracking the trade station's traffic logs, searching for any ship registered to a salvager named Daniel Reyes. The attack came at the worst possible time, in the middle of a routine supply run when the station's defenses were stretched thin, covering 3 other docking events at once. Daniel would look back on that timing later and realize it had not been luck at all. It had been planned. He was walking Rook through the lower cargo levels, the young dragon now large enough that he no longer needed a leash, when the lights along the corridor flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in dim red. Daniel's first thought was a power failure. His second thought, the one that made his stomach drop, was that power failures did not usually come with the sound of boots moving in formation somewhere down the hall. "Rook," Daniel said quietly, and the dragon was already moving, placing himself between Daniel and the sound before Daniel had even finished the word. Through their bond, Daniel felt Rook's fear shift into something sharper, something closer to focus. The young dragon might not have fully grown into his strength yet, but instinct did not care about that. The first shot came without warning, a bright bolt of energy that scorched the wall inches from where Daniel had been standing a moment before. He threw himself sideways, and Rook let out a sound unlike anything Daniel had heard from him before, a deep, rattling roar that shook dust loose from the ceiling. Then the Corvath strike team came around the corner, 6 armored figures moving with practiced precision, weapons already raised. They were not here to negotiate. That much was clear from the way they opened fire the moment they had a clean line of sight, aiming not for Daniel but for Rook, clearly intending to disable or kill the dragon before dealing with the human afterward. They had underestimated both of their targets. Rook moved faster than something his size should have been able to move, ducking low and slamming his shoulder into the nearest attacker, sending the armored figure crashing into the wall. A second Corvath soldier fired at close range, the bolt scorching across Rook's scales without penetrating them, and the young dragon responded with a burst of superheated plasma from his throat, A first taste of an ability neither Daniel nor Rook had known he possessed until that exact moment. The corridor lit up bright orange, and the soldier who had fired barely dove clear in time. Daniel had no weapon beyond a multi-tool from his engineering kit, but he was not about to stand there uselessly. He grabbed a heavy length of pipe from a maintenance rack along the wall and swung it hard into the back of a soldier trying to flank Rook from behind, buying the dragon another second to turn and meet the rest of the attackers head-on. It was chaos. Plasma fire lit the corridor in flashes. Rook's roars mixed with the shouts of soldiers trying to hold formation against an opponent far more dangerous than their intelligence had suggested. And Daniel fought at Rook's side with nothing but a pipe and pure stubbornness, refusing to be pulled away no matter how much danger he was in. Through the bond, he could feel Rook's fierce determination to protect him, a feeling so strong it nearly overwhelmed his own senses, and it gave him strength he did not know he had. The fight ended almost as quickly as it began. With two of their number down and the element of surprise completely gone, the remaining Coveth soldiers retreated, covering their withdrawal with suppressive fire that scorched the walls but hit nothing vital. Rook did not chase them. He stayed close to Daniel instead, breathing hard, scales scorched but unbroken, standing guard until the station's own security finally arrived far too late to matter. The damage to the station was significant. 2 corridors were left scorched and unusable, several bystanders had been injured in the crossfire, and one had died, a maintenance worker caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The news spread across the coalition within hours. The last dragon in the galaxy was not just alive. He was dangerous, and he had already proven willing to fight to protect the man bonded to him. In the aftermath, sitting in a station medical bay while a nervous doctor checked him over for injuries he mostly did not have, Daniel finally learned more about why the Coveth feared the Draconi so deeply. Torin explained it quietly, once the room had cleared. The Draconi were never just a military power, Torin said. For centuries, their bonded dragons served as a check on Coveth expansion. Every time the Dominion tried to push their borders outward, it was Draconi riders who stopped them. The genocide was not simple conquest, Daniel. It was fear. The Dominion could not stand the idea of a species with that kind of power existing anywhere near their territory, ever again. And now there's one dragon left, Daniel said slowly, bonded to a human. Bonded to a species with even less to lose than the Draconi had, Torin said. No homeworld under threat. No empire to protect. Just you and him, and nothing holding either of you back. I imagine that terrifies them more than an entire fleet would. That night, Torin and a handful of allied coalition representatives offered Daniel protection, safe passage to a more secure location, extra security details, anything he needed. But every offer came with the same quiet warning underneath it. Hiding was no longer an option. The Coveth Dominion knew exactly where to find them now, and they were not going to stop. Daniel looked over at Rook, resting nearby despite his injuries, still watching the door with wary, alert eyes even in rest. Whatever came next, Daniel realized, running was not going to be part of it. Running had never really been an option, not for Daniel. He decided instead to do the one thing nobody expected him to do. He decided to go looking for a fight on his own terms, before the Coveth could find him again on theirs. It started with the memories. In the weeks since the attack, the fragments Daniel had been receiving through his bond with Rook had grown clearer, less like scattered dreams and more like actual recollections, sharp enough now that Daniel could almost walk through them like a man walking through someone else's house. Torin, working with a team of coalition linguists, helped Daniel piece the fragments into something resembling a map, coordinates buried deep in memories that were not his own. There is a place, Daniel told Torin one evening, staring at the star chart they had assembled together. A stronghold, I keep seeing it. It feels important. Torin studied the coordinates carefully, cross-referencing them against old Draconi records that had survived the war in scattered archives across coalition space. His expression shifted slowly from curiosity to something closer to disbelief. "This location does not appear on any current map," Torrens said, "but it matches old references to what the Draconi called their final sanctuary. A place kept hidden even from their own people, meant only to be found in the direst of circumstances. If this still exists, Daniel, it may contain everything the Dominion tried to erase." That was enough for Daniel. Within 2 days his ship was fueled, Rook was fully recovered from the attack, and they set off toward the coordinates buried in memories that belonged to a species that no longer existed, chased the entire way by Coveth scouts who had picked up their trail almost immediately. The journey was tense. Twice, Coveth patrol ships intercepted them along the route, and twice Rook, now grown large enough to fill most of the cargo hold he had once hatched in, proved capable of handling threats that would have destroyed Daniel's small freighter outright. His plasma breath had grown stronger with every use, and his scales had hardened into something closer to armor plating than simple hide. He was becoming, day by day, exactly what the old Draconi records described, a creature built for war. They reached the stronghold on the edge of a dead system, a fortress carved directly into the side of a massive asteroid, its exterior dark and lifeless, its defenses long dormant. But the moment Rook's presence registered against ancient sensors buried in the rock, the fortress woke up. Lights flickered on across its surface. Old defense systems recognized something in the bond between Daniel and Rook, something coded deep into their design centuries ago, and the gates opened without resistance. Inside, they found history preserved exactly as it had been left. War records, battle plans, detailed accounts of the Dominion's final campaign against the Draconi, including evidence the Dominion had spent years trying to erase, proof that the war had not been a fair fight at all, but a calculated extermination planned years in advance and carried out with deliberate, merciless efficiency. Daniel began transmitting everything he found the moment he understood what it meant, sending copies across every coalition channel he could reach before the Dominion could stop him. It was not subtle, it was not careful, but it was effective, and within hours the news was already spreading faster than anyone could contain it. The Dominion responded the only way they knew how. A fleet arrived at the edge of the dead system less than a day later, their commanders no longer interested in capturing Rook alive. Their orders now were simple: destroy the stronghold, destroy the evidence, and destroy anyone who had seen it. Daniel stood on the surface of the asteroid fortress, Rook beside him, watching the Dominion fleet arrive in numbers that made his stomach twist. It should have been hopeless. One dragon, not yet fully matured, against a fleet built for war. But Daniel had never been the kind of man who calculated the odds before deciding whether to fight. The battle that followed would be talked about for years afterward across coalition space. Rook took to the sky, meeting Dominion fighters head-on, plasma breath tearing through their formations, while his armored scales shrugged off return fire that would have crippled a ship twice his size. Daniel coordinated from the ground, using old Draconi defense systems buried in the fortress to redirect power to aging but still functional weapon emplacements, turning the stronghold itself into an unexpected second line of defense. It was not enough on its own. The Dominion fleet was too large, too well armed, and for a long, brutal stretch of time, it looked as though the battle would end exactly the way the Dominion intended. But the evidence Daniel had transmitted earlier had already done its work. Coalition ships, alerted by the broadcast and outraged by what they had learned, began arriving in the system, first a handful, then dozens, forcing the Dominion fleet to split its attention between the fortress and an enemy it had not expected to face. By the time the fighting ended, the Dominion fleet was in full retreat, its commanders unwilling to risk further losses against a coalition response they had badly underestimated. Rook, exhausted and scorched but alive, landed heavily beside Daniel on the fortress surface, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. They simply stood together, surrounded by the wreckage of a battle that should never have been winnable, and let themselves believe, for the first time in weeks, that it might finally be over. The evidence Daniel had pulled from that hidden stronghold did more damage to the Korvath Dominion than any battle ever could have. Within weeks, Coalition investigators had confirmed everything the old Draconi records claimed, detailed proof of a genocide planned years in advance, carried out not as an act of war but as a calculated act of extermination. Governments that had once quietly looked away from the Dominion's actions could no longer afford to ignore them. Sanctions followed. Alliances broke. The Dominion, once one of the most feared powers in the region, found itself isolated almost overnight, its political influence crumbling under the weight of truths it had spent years trying to bury. Daniel did not pay much attention to any of it, not at first. In the days after the battle, all his focus went into caring for Rook, who had taken more damage than either of them initially realized. Several scales cracked and scorched despite their new toughness. One wing strained badly enough that flying was painful for almost 2 weeks afterward. Daniel barely left his side, sleeping in the same cargo hold where Rook had first hatched, the two of them recovering together in a silence that needed no words. It was Torin who eventually convinced Daniel to leave the ship long enough to see what the outside galaxy had made of everything that happened. The images were everywhere. Footage from the battle, pulled from coalition ships that had arrived just in time to help, showed a young dragon fighting alone against overwhelming odds beside a single human refusing to abandon him. It had become something of a legend already, retold and reshaped with each new telling, though the core of it remained true enough. A species barely a few generations into space travel had stood its ground against one of the region's most feared powers, and had won. Offers began arriving almost immediately. Coalition governments wanted Daniel as an advisor. Historical societies wanted access to Rook and the fortress records for study. A handful of newly formed political movements, inspired by what had happened, wanted Daniel to become some kind of symbol, a figurehead for a growing call to hold old powers accountable for old crimes. Daniel turned down every single one. "I'm not a leader," he told Torin plainly, during one of the quieter evenings after the fighting had ended. "I'm a salvager who found an egg he wasn't supposed to touch." "And yet here you are," Torin said, "at the center of something far larger than either of us expected." What Daniel did accept was a much smaller, much quieter offer: help from a coalition of scientists, historians, and a handful of surviving Draconi artifacts scattered across old archives, all working together to begin restoring what could be restored of Draconi history and culture. The fortress became the center of that effort, no longer a hidden weapon of war, but something closer to a sanctuary and a memorial, a place where the last remnants of an entire civilization could finally be honored instead of erased. Rook healed slowly, his wing mending fully after a few more weeks, his body continuing its unnaturally fast growth until he had reached a size that would have made even the old Draconi War records proud, easily large enough now to carry riders of his own, though Daniel remained the only one he ever allowed near him. Their bond, if anything, had only grown stronger through everything they had survived together, a connection neither of them had asked for, but neither of them would have traded away now for anything. Word continued trickling in from across coalition space in the months that followed, other salvage crews reporting strange readings in old Draconi ruins, other hidden vaults discovered in forgotten corners of dead systems, other fragments of a lost civilization waiting to be found. Whether any of them held more surviving eggs, nobody could say for certain. But for the first time since the war ended, there was real hope that the Draconi legacy might not be entirely gone after all. On a quiet evening months after the battle, Daniel stood on the surface of the restored fortress, now bathed in warm light from carefully repaired systems, watching Rook stretch his wings and take to the sky above the asteroid for the simple joy of flying. No threat chasing him this time, no danger waiting in the dark. The dragon circled once, twice, then let out a long, clear call that echoed across the empty system, a sound that had not been heard in this part of the galaxy in over 6 years. Torin joined Daniel at the edge of the platform, watching the same sight, and for a while, neither of them spoke. They used to say humanity was too young to matter much out here, Torin finally said. Too small, too new. Daniel watched Rook glide lower, coming in for a landing beside him, silver scales catching the light as he folded his wings and settled close, exactly as he had the very first night he hatched into Daniel's hands. "Guess they were wrong," Daniel said. And somewhere out among the stars, the galaxy was already beginning to agree.